About a little over 2 years ago, maybe almost 3 years ago, I came to the realization that there was something really wrong, and started to look at the fact that a lot of the buildings that we were doing weren't meeting a lot of the needs out there. Churches were seeing decline. There was a particular group of people that weren't coming to church, and that was what we now call the Millennials. And finding that one of those portions of that is the building. That's only one, but the things that we had in our buildings just weren't working very well for that group. And I tell people all the time that you may look at us and say, gosh, they've done maybe more churches than anyone, but the majority of those plans that we did in that period of time, you would not want to use for one of your buildings. It would be a disaster using it in today's world in terms of where you're trying to go. And so we started really trying to understand what kind of designs do we need to do, what are they looking at and where are they at, and that took me on an area that has really become not your parents' church. It's many of the things that we're looking at. And I found things I really didn't expect as I started through that area, and it has tremendously changed the way that we approach church design, what we're supposed to do in those areas, how are we going to make churches work for this next generation especially. And I'm going to go through that today. And but the four things we're really going to look at is the demographic shift. The second is how do we change? Take a look at what 21st century design looks like, and then examine just some of the things that we found worked well. And I could probably show you a lot more things that didn't work well, but we're starting to really understand what is working in church design today and how we should approach that. One of the most interesting areas here is trying to examine demographic shift. I think I've got this upside down. I got it figured out here now. To start with, we want to look at who the millennials are, and there's really two groups of people that I've studied a great deal over the last 3 years, and it's been the baby boomers, which is my generation, and the millennials, which is most of my kids' generations. I have 6 children that fit into that category, and I said I know something of the millennials because I have my name on them with some of them, and they really meet many of the characteristics that we've looked at here. There's obviously a group that's older than the boomers. It's a fairly small population at this point. There's a group in between those, which is also a rather small population, but the two that you really want to examine and that are critical to what's going on in our church today happen to be the millennials and the baby boomers. The millennials, while it's about 83 million people, if you actually look at all of that group today, which would be legal and not legal citizens of the United States, it's about 100 million people. And so it's nearly 1 out of every 3 people in the United States today. That's just a big number to be looking at. About 40% of it is minorities. This is just some statistics about the group. They are very colorblind. They are digital natives. About 15% say they're religious. That doesn't mean they go to church. It just says they're religious, and we're going to show you some numbers on that. There's about 6 million attend church regularly, compared to about 37 million, or about 50% of the baby boomers. So there's a little bit of you start to see a little bit of the problem right there. If we've got roughly about 37 million people that are going out one door through changes in their lifestyle and just plain dying, and you've got 6 million coming in to fill those seats, that is a fairly significant problem. And I talked about that for about a year, I think, as I went around to seminars and where it's at. And very honestly, I did a really poor job of communication because churches did not get it. They did not understand it. And then started looking at some other things. Now, some of the things that generation wants are really rather interesting. They will join small groups pretty easily. They like contemporary style worship. They don't like, and this is something that is maybe one of the most misunderstood things in churches today, is that we tend to think contemporary means hard rock, Christian rock music, and something that is that everyone would really dislike a lot. The fact is, you could take all of the music out of there and they would still want to come to your service if you're going into the area they're at. What they don't like, and it's maybe easier to say that, is they don't like to show up at church and have 3 songs, somebody gives the announcement, somebody gives a sermon, you have 2 songs and you're out. That really is what they see as something they saw when they were kids. They didn't like it, still don't like it, are just not very involved in what that is. They like to help others, probably the group of people that will volunteer to do things faster than any other group of people that you've got. They will roam between churches, those that are going to churches. And interestingly, 96% of those in a survey done by, a very, very large survey done by the Baptist Church Organization, showed that 96% of them want to be invited, and if invited, would come to church. And about 92 or 3% want to be mentored by older people. Now, those 2 statistics by themselves are incredible if you look at the potential of a group that would come if they're invited, and secondly, would like to be mentored. The problem is this: they don't like what they see when they get there. And we'll go through why that is and what's happening. This is rather interesting because it goes through the millennial income area, and right now the baby boomers are a little less than 70% of all the income in the United States. All the W-2 income, all of the income, all the wealth of the United States is in the baby boomers. More specifically, the majority of it is the early part of the baby boomers, which is critical to this analysis because the early part of the baby boomers are obviously going to retire first. Now, they're 70% of all the income in the United States. They're 90% of all the giving in the United States to Christian churches. So they are extremely important to what you're trying to do. If you go back to your own individual churches and say to your treasurer or the people that are involved in it, what age group are giving, the great majority of the money, and you're going to find that almost all the churches in the country, you're going to find it's the baby boomers. And that's fine as we sit in 2010, 2011. It's not so fine by the time we get to 2016, when their income has dropped to 20% of all the income in the United States. If you can even imagine what that might look like, it's a real problem. And then more importantly, that green segment, which is the millennials, go from 5% to 55%. Now really, that even isn't a problem, because you've got a bunch of people coming in at the bottom that are going to replace the ones that were at the top, and they're going to equal the same amount of income. There's just a slight problem with that, and that's that they're not going to church.